Hello everyone, welcome to the Organic Agriculture webinar series. Today we have Mr. Roshan Ranawaka with us. Welcome to the program, Roshan.
Good morning, Chandra.
Why don't we start with a small introduction to yourself?
All right. So, in fact, I'm a graduate from agriculture, so University of Peradeniya. So, in fact, I was one of the lucky ones. So, 2 days after my graduation, I joined this company.
Yeah.
But that time it was Cull International. So now 17 years. This is my 17th year with the company. So during these 17 years, I have played many roles, starting with an auditor, then became senior auditor, then became certifier. And also I was quite lucky enough to manage the global operation of one of the international programs called Global Gap. So that we have operation in about 30 countries.
Yeah.
So about 6,000 clients globally. So I was the scheme manager who was handling the program. So having done that well, so I was offered to come into the general management from the technical management.
Yeah.
Where I started up as a managing director in Myanmar, which was a new challenge, new country. So it was a very nice experience to me. So I lived there for 6 years, built up the business, and of course, in fact, I had to do a lot of coaching there because Myanmar was isolated.
Yeah.
So they were more towards east than west. So whereas what we do in certifications mostly appreciated in west.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of convincing and coaching to be done. It was a very nice experience. But then again, there was a need in back home, as well as I got another opportunity as well, but I chose to come back home.
Yeah.
So since 2019 December, I'm here now. So basically right now, currently I'm the managing director of control in Sri Lanka as well as Myanmar. But in addition, I have another additional role, which is like in our world group, we have 3 different regions. One is America, the other one is Africa, Europe and Middle East. Then you have Asia. So there are 3 different regional management teams. So I'm also member of the Asian regional management team.
Right.
That's brief of me.
Right. So right now we are here at the new premises of the control union. So let's talk about the control union.
Sure.
The history of the organization, where you are working at the moment.
True. Talking about the global group, so the control union started in the Netherlands in 1920. So we are now 101 years old. We really wanted to celebrate that. Unfortunately, the prevailing pandemic didn't allow us to do so.
Yeah.
So then there are 3 major divisions in control union. One is called control union world group. The other one is Peterson offshore group and the Peterson integrated logistics. So altogether there are 5,000 plus employees around the globe, covering about 75 countries into different many sectors. Talking about Sri Lanka, I think this is the 25th year in Sri Lanka.
Oh.
So we started in 98 in Sri Lanka as Cull International, but later on Cull International was taken over by Control Union. So since then we have been basically seen as the organic certification body, but then we also diversified ourselves into other related programs. That is mainly came from the clients because the clients who served was more confined into organic, and they also wanted to have their other certification needs through us, so that their information and their all the confidential information is shared with only one party, and you don't have so many auditing companies going through the company throughout the year. So with that, we were pushed into other related programs as well. So later on, maybe I can come up with a little more details.
Definitely. Roshan, let's talk about your major stakeholders.
Sure. So as basically, being a certification body service provider, so I think the clients are our major stakeholder. So when it talks about clients, they are in a different variety of sectors. So mainly predominantly on agri and food sector, but also we work on the apparel sector. So there are some specific standards, textile specific standard talking about sustainability. So we have been there involved, and we also work on the forestry. Of course, the forest management is not a big topic here compared to Malaysia and Indonesia, but also we do the supply chain. But in addition, we also work on the inspection agency. We are a certification body as well as we do inspection. So they are also, again, most of the time our clients are exporters. So that's about briefly about the clients. But also then we do work on the other related government institutes. So EDB is one of the prominent institutes that we are working with, because that's the bureau to promote local exports. Again, we are also working with the SLSI, the Sri Lanka Standard Institute, when it comes to the local standards. Plus, we are also one of the accredited certification bodies by SLEDB. We do have accreditations coming from Europe, but also there are some schemes that we have sought the accreditation through SLEDB. Also, on the other hand, we also work with other non-governmental organizations as well, who supports the existing areas that we are operating on, we are also working with them. So that's mainly if you talk about the stakeholders. But in addition to the exporters, talking about clients, again, we also have the local producers here as well, who are basically seeking, because initially, right at the beginning, mostly the standards are more appreciated at the outside destination. So the clients were majority coming from the exporters. But nowadays, we see more and more the local produce are also being standardized. So there are lot of local manufacturers, producers are also part of our clientele.
Right. So certification is one of your major activities, right? So if you look at the market space of certification in Sri Lanka, who are the other major certification programs?
So there are also other certification bodies, mainly when it comes to ISO and system certification. So there's quite a lot here. In that case, I would say we were one of the later ones, because before us, there were other certification bodies who had been doing well here. I think namely it's SJS, Bureau Veritas, you have DNV. So they were actually quite prominent on the management system certification wise. But when it comes to organic, I think the history of organic product export of Sri Lanka and us, I would say it's more or less the same.
Yeah.
Because we started with that, but then we also diversified into other spaces. But when it comes to textiles, again, I would say 95% of what we do as sustainable textiles goes through us.
Right. So that means predominantly, let's say, more than 90% of the market share in terms of organic certification is being done by the Control Union.
It's like there are 336 certified parties in the country. So we have certified 330 out of them.
Right. So most of it. Yes. Now, Roshan, let's say an exporter was to come to Sri Lanka and work with, let's say, a set of certified farmers. Now, if they come and talk to you, would you in a position to link these two parties together and help them to establish the value chain?
Of course, that has been what we have been doing historically, actually, because, being a service provider, unless you have an exporter who is prominently doing business, actually your service is no more needed. But also being certification body, we also have our thin margin that we can't cross beyond. But of course, starting from our website. So even if someone, let's say, even without visiting us physically, if someone wanted to see what are the products, what are the companies that we have certified, that we have allowed through our website. But usually then following that, what happens is most of them try to reach us and ask us who are the potential suppliers. So therefore, we have already ready-made set of suppliers, because you know that they're talking about spices, they're talking about coconut, they're talking about tea, basically without any favoration to anybody. So we have a list of clients who can be categorized under product category. So we used to share with them.
Right.
So that we have been doing that linking, and of course, to be honest, there are a lot of companies who has gained success through that. So we see that that is also something that we can be proud of, doing certification in the country.
Right. Thank you. Roshan, let's focus ourselves more onto organic certifications. Can you walk us through the major organic certification programs that you do?
All right. So even if you look at the export volumes out of the country as organic, so you would also see there were 3 major certification programs that is dominant. Actually, of course, in fact, out of that, the most dominant one is European Organic Regulation. And then we have the USDA NOP, we call it the National Organic Program of USA. Then we call it JAS, the Japanese Agriculture Standard, that is destined to Japan. But also in the recent years, we also see all the other countries who are also the organic, the trading landscape is also being changing. But also in the recent past, we found that the countries from LATAM, mainly Mexico and Brazil, they have been also have had their local schemes. So they are also demanding it for the imports into those countries. So those are also the new schemes that we have also got our recognition to go for. And one of the other prominent scheme which is coming up is, of course, I forgot to mention, that was Korea, South Korea. So that program has been there, and now you see, their affordability is going up. So you see that more and more products are now consumed in Korea, so organic products. And there, of course, again, our obligation is to have it certified as Korean organic. So I would say these are the 6-7 programs that are prominent in the organic space in the country.
Now, Roshan, in terms of the demand for different certification types, is there a difference between the Sri Lankan situation and the global situation?
Yes, but yes and no. So it's basically, if you look at the global statistics, if you take the global retail, the volumes, 85% has been shared between EU and USA, which is always the same case in Sri Lanka. 90 to 95% is shared between USA and EU. But in the global statistics, USA actually carries about a larger space compared to EU. But whereas in Sri Lanka, so our larger market is EU, which is, I told you, explained you earlier as well. So 60% has been exported out to Europe, and whereas 35% to USA. But in the global statistics, USA is leading. But finally, if you take USA and EU together, that still looks like globally as well as locally, 85 to 90% of the market share is still with these two destinations.
Right. And during our initial discussion, you mentioned two specific roles that control union does. One is it's a certifier, but at the same time it acts as an inspector as well. Can you explain these two roles?
Sure. So certification has been the most dominant service activity we do. I would say even in terms of our revenue, 90% comes from the certification activities. But whereas inspection is needed mainly in the global trading, so certification is that you go into a location, you look into the system, and then you have an assurance about the system. You basically give an assurance to the consumer that the product is coming from a organized, standardized operation. But whereas in business, people also would like to have that assurance per consignment or per sample.
Right.
So whereas then they are looking into third-party agency. Let's say now you export 100 kilos to me, and I'm in USA, you are in New Zealand. So we have not met each other. But of course, then you send you a sample. I'm happy with it. So then we move on with the consignment. So in that case, the moment when I say, okay, now I'm ready to export to you, so you appoint a third party. Basically, when it is in my godowns, so the third party goes in, take an independent representative samples, and look into the operation and gives you a feedback to see whether your expectations are met with my destination.
Right.
So that's the difference between inspection and certification. Inspection, even though it is done once, even for the next consignment, you would go there. But whereas in certifications, it is actually more or less a system check. So where we basically go in, take a random sample, take a risk-based approach, so that we evaluate the product or the process of making the product, so that we could give an assurance for a year. There are certification programs even that the validity goes for 5 years.
Right.
So I would say that is the major difference between inspection and certification.
Right. Roshan, now with respect to testing samples for consignments, does the control union has the capacity to do these sample testings?
Yeah. So in that case, actually locally we don't have the capacity to do the analysis. But of course, we are also thinking about it. But generally, what happens is when the analysis needs comes to both the activities, certification activities as well as in the inspection activities. So in the certification activities, more or less the sample that we draw, where it to be sent is it's actually the decision of the certification body. Whereas in the inspections, where the samples to be sent is depending on the buyer's requirement.
Right.
So sometimes if the buyers have a trust and the reliability about the local laboratories in the country. In fact, even if we don't have laboratories, there are 6-7 prominent laboratories in the country. Even there are ones with 100 years old history. But of course, sometimes the analysis needs are different at the destination. So whereas sometimes, especially when it comes to pesticide analysis, that is where I think our bottleneck is. So in Europe, they at least wanted to see a 600 plus profile of a different kind of residues, whereas no laboratory in Sri Lanka yet has that actually. There are laboratories who can go up to 300, but of course, which actually covers the chemicals that are used in the country. But of course, unfortunately, the demand is to go for more. So therefore, mostly we have to send our samples, especially the certification samples, I would say 100% goes to the labs in Europe.
Right.
But inspections, I would say 50-50. Some samples goes up to the Europe and some are analyzed locally.
Right. Now, Roshan, in terms of getting certification, there are two basic approaches, right? You can either get a certification as an individual, or there's a process of getting certification as a farmer group. Now, how do you explain the difference between these two?
All right. So basically, when it goes to an individual farmer, whether you are certified as an individual farmer or a farmer group, finally, if you walk into one farm land parcel, what has to be adapted is the same. So if you're following the EU regulation, even the individual farmer has to follow the EU regulation. Even the member of a farmer group also in his land parcel has to follow the EU regulation. But what makes the difference is actually how do we differentiate also in the standard. There are different standards talking about how the individual and the group farmers can be differentiated. It's mainly based on their economic size or the land size, right? So there, why this differentiation is when you are economically bigger and the land size wise also bigger, basically there's a higher positive relationship between your land size and the economic size. So then you can imagine an individual who could manage his operation, who could digest the standard and manage that operation alone. But whereas when it goes to a small scale farmer, his economic size is so small, going into the market, his chances of having a bargain is also small, whereas it makes sense them get together as a group. But in that case, being a small scale farmer, especially countries like Sri Lanka, where the knowledge of standards are not so high at the farm level, where they need support. So in that case, the farmers could be clubbed together and go as one individual entity for the certification. So the difference is now you have 100 people together going as certification. Even you and me get together. So I have my different opinions. Somebody else can have a different opinion. So there should be a mechanism to put them all into a common understanding. What is the standard is about? What are the code of practices that has to be done? To do that, there is a system proposed in the standards. Most of the standards, we call it ICS, the internal control system. So there is an internal control system where it is headed by a few knowledgeable people who takes the knowledge to the farmers, explain them what has to be done, and there is a separate team without conflicting their work at the farm level. So they go and monitor and check whether that knowledge transfer has been very effective. So that means farmers should have basically adapted the standard as per the regulations. So therefore, this internal control system is the specific mechanism that how to manage a farmer group efficiently. Whereas for an individual farmer, there is no internal control system. But on the other hand, if you take from the certification body's point of view, individual producer, sizable farm has to be audited annually. Whereas a group farmer, when there is a sufficient effective internal control system adopted at the farmer group, then the certification body, the task is basically to assess the effectiveness of the internal control system and then to pull out a sample which is risk-based to validate the decision that you made on the effectiveness of the internal control system. So there, in that case, if there are 100 farmers, I might not go to inspect all 100 farmers. I would go about 20 or 14 if it is an effective system. Whereas individual farmers, they have to be audited annually to have their validity continued.
Roshan, now we are expecting changes to EU regulations to come into place very soon. Can you walk us through some of the major changes?
Talking about changes related to processing. So the highlight is that there are some amendments with regard to the use of non-organic materials in organic production, which actually is now more towards earlier there were some ingredients which were allowed to be used in the form of non-organic, but now it has been made mandatory to look for materials that are certified organic. But also there is a prominent area on flavorings. So earlier, because the previous standard was referring to the past older regulation of the flavorings, which now in the new 848 regulation, it refers to the latest flavoring regulation of EU, which is 1334. So with that, actually, I would say more than a change, that clarifies a lot of things, which was not in past. So these are under the 4 different sectors, you can see the topics that you could assume that the changes will have an impact on the certificate holders.
Right. So you explained quite a lot of changes which are supposed to come in very soon. So what sort of an impact would we have from these changes?
Maybe talking about in the Sri Lankan context.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you can specifically focus on the group certification.
Sure.
That's one of the significant components.
Exactly. I think you already gave me the part of the answer.
Yes.
Because in Sri Lanka, if you see at farm level, if you see the number of certified entities, I would say most successful story is always about group farmers.
Yes.
It's not limited to Sri Lanka, it's in Asia, it's in Africa, it's in Latin America. So if you see, these are the 3 major destinations which supplies the commodities to major markets. So therefore, this group farmer certification is very dominant factor in the organic certification in all these 3 regions, but as well as in Sri Lanka. So there are even Sri Lanka, there are our certified clients who has close to 10,000 farmers, so which is actually quite a large number compared to Sri Lankan context. So therefore, these changes in the group farmer certification, I think if you ask me to rate out of these different 4 categories of changes, what would impact us most, I would say it is the changes applied on the group farmer certification.
Right.
Where now there is a limitation of number of members who can join a group, which is 2,000. So I already said that there are clients who has the farmer groups going beyond 2,000. But of course, I also said that our effective date is actually 1st of January 2025. So these companies are already seeking the means and modes. How do they get adhered to this one? But on the other hand, now there is a proper clear definition about a small farm. So usually it is based on 2 factors. One is on the land size, the other one is on the economical scale. So in terms of economical scale, the equation is the cost of an individual farmer, if it is more than the 2% of the turnover, annual turnover of the farm, then he is being classified as an individual farm. Okay. So more lower than that, it's a small farm.
Right.
In terms of revenue, if the annual revenue is more than 25,000 euros, you are classified as an individual farmer. Below that can be classified as a small farmer. But in terms of acreage, now it is restricted to 5 hectares.
Wow.
So in Sri Lankan context, 5 hectares is actually quite a large size, to be honest. So therefore, that wouldn't be a bit of a challenge. But also for greenhouses, it is 0.5 hectares. Actually, very less number of greenhouses are certified as organic in the country. Then there is another limitation for 15 hectares for grassland, which is not applicable for us. So that's about the definition of the farmer. Then the internal control system. But I think internal control system, there are no bigger changes. Even if you see what certification bodies have been adapting previously, before this was brought into the standard, I don't see a bigger difference. So therefore, in Sri Lanka, there are good companies who has been performing very nice job in internal control. I think for them, managing the farmer group would not have a bigger impact. So the retroactive consideration of the field history is also a very related topic, because every farmer, now especially farmer group, bringing in new farmers. That means farmers who have not been certified before. So it doesn't mean that they have been doing conventional farming. They may be doing natural farming without using disallowed substances, but of course they have not been certified. So in this process, earlier certification bodies had a process to look into the risk factors and to assess what has happened, at least during last 3 years, then make a judgment on how long they should be wait in the conversion period. But now that has been brought into the standard. So I see there is a prominent role that NOP could play, the National Organic Control Unit in Sri Lanka, because before the NOP was invented, actually the certification bodies had to look into different other authorities, related authorities. If it is coconut, the Coconut Development Authority; if it is tea board, the related authority from the tea, to get this consent. But of course, it is not part of their mandate. So therefore, sometimes it was not always been entertained by the local authorities. But now, since we have that NOP, which is even, there are plans to make it more powerful, making it NOCA, the National Organic Control Authority. I think that's a very added advantage for us. And even within the country, NOCA can also have a uniform way of establish a uniform way, so that every certification body work in the space could go through NOCA, so that what is being assessed in terms of retroactive consideration of the field history could be uniform, irrespective of the approach of the certification body. So therefore, I think in that case, even though it could be a new thing now, but I think having a NOCA with us, and also previously there are certification bodies who had developed their own standard, I think that would also not make a big difference. But of course, earlier the clients had to go and seek this, because they know that the farm has not been treated, but they need an evidence, right? So they needed evidence, and also they needed a declaration from a third party also to validate the evidence. So now I think still there can be a lot of discussions takes place between NOCA as well, because NOCA has another bigger mandate to talk about, not only to facilitate this process of the certification, but I think looking at the growth of organic industry, we have to grow the volumes. So that means bringing in new farmers is essential, and especially of course with the latest government approach. But of course now there's a step, they have taken a step back, but I think there's a nice motivation within the country to go towards organic. So therefore we can expect more and more farmers to come up with it. And in that, there can be farmers who had not been actually using disallowed substance. If the disallowed substance have been used in the land parcel, then of course they have to follow the usual process of going under the 3-year in conversion. So I would say these how it could impact us, mainly in terms of group farmer certification. But in terms of processing and the scope wise, because sea salt being able to certify, I think will not have a bigger impact on us. In terms of processing, of course, for some of the processors, they were using this guar gum and xanthan gum, which was earlier could be used as non-organic, in the form of non-organic. But now the new regulation make it mandatory to look for an organic source.
Right.
And there could be some impact for the companies, especially in the tea sector, who are actually using flavors. So now there is a very clear definition about flavors. In that, basically now if you are looking at, earlier there was limitation, but now the maximum amount of non-organic flavor can be used is only 5% from the weight.
Right.
But or else, if it is an organic flavor, of course, it can be considered as an ingredient, it can be part and parcel of your recipe. But if we are talking about natural flavor, with the new 1334 regulations, there is a definition for the word natural. That means if the flavoring portion of that natural should come from the source material. So if you are talking about strawberry flavor, so 95% of the flavoring portion should come from strawberry. So that could have a little impact on some of the companies who are mainly into value addition of tea. So then the flavoring is part of that actually. So that I could see as an impact in the Sri Lankan context.
Right. Now you have been in this sector for a long time, and what sort of advice would you give for us to be, getting ready to take these changes?
Having a established robust internal control system plays a vital role, not only to take up the challenges caused by the new regulation, but also looking at the market demands nowadays. So the industry that we are working on, we call it TIC, the testing, inspection and certification. If you see this industry, that had been tripled in the last decade. Out of that, the largest space is taken by the laboratories, and that itself shows that most of the products are now analyzed compared to past. The need of analysis is really been quite a lot, and the methods and the techniques have improved so much. Earlier, when I joined 17 years ago, we were talking about 2 decimal points, but whereas now they're going up to 4th decimal point, and you have been questioned for the 4th decimal point, which sometimes could be very unintentional. So therefore, but you need to have proper justifiable explanation to say so. So therefore, especially managing a farmer group, it is coming from different land parcel. If you have one land parcel, you have a perfect control. If you have the one vision to do right, you can have the better control. Whereas when you're managing thousands of farmers, so the intentions might be a little different. So therefore, having a robust internal control system would be the key for us, because that is the largest space that creates the raw material for the industry to export. So this I would see from the certification body's point of view, we have to contribute to bring the clarity to the industry, and also from the client's perspective, I think they should have to have more and more stringent control in especially on the raw material source.
Right. Now, Roshan, this brings to our last question. Now, being in the industry for a long time and being the predominant certifier of organic value chains, where do you see Sri Lanka has its competitive advantage in terms of value chains?
Sure. Talking about 2018, the AHK has done an assessment where they have found that the total volume that is exported out of the country in 2018 was 45,000 tons, which actually they have been estimating a value of 259 million euros. So when we did our assessment on 2020, so the volumes have reached up to 79,000 tons, so which is almost, actually it has doubled between 2 years. So, but of course we don't have a bigger insight into the values, but I think now EDB is also working on having a separate HS code, so you will have more clarity on the organic exports in future. But if you try to apply the same the multiplier into the values, then you're talking about at least 500 million euros coming into the country exporting organic products. Looking into the figures of 2021, we are honestly in the middle of assessing data, but this is a rough estimation. Definitely the volumes have grown. It could be varies between 10 to 15%. But whereas in the number of transaction certificates, like when after issuing the scope certificate, which is valid for a year, every time when a certificate holder exports, we issue another certificate which is called transaction certificate that is confined to the particular consignment.
Right.
So that is also good indication. If the number of transaction certificate goes up, the number of transactions have gone up. When looking at that, actually that had grown in 25%. But whereas we don't see that the volume has grown at the same time, which could be the only way you can look at it is probably that could be the result of pandemic. That means the certain volumes have been split among few.
Right.
Earlier, like there was a one transaction certificate, a bigger volume.
Right.
So it can be counted one. But now the same volume goes in 10, it can be counted 10 in number of transactions. So we see the number of transaction certificates have grown in 25%. But whereas we estimate the volume has grown only between 10 to 15%. So that shows that either there are more parties exporting, or sometimes certain buyers have split their orders into several parties instead of clinging into one.
Right.
So this is the rough estimation of 2021. Probably when we meet next time, I will let you know more detail about 2021.
Of course. But if you look at specific product categories, let's say, where do you see our demand is?
Absolutely. So coconut had been the major contributor to the organic exports, as I explained you earlier. So based on 2020 statistics, 62% of the total volume is actually contributed from the coconut industry. But then the rest of the industry, talk about the tea, of course, that has been also historically. Sri Lanka has the world's first organic tea estate. So that's how history goes. So the tea has been also a prominent product. Then followed up with tea, the spices, and the fruits. But also you see sometimes the latest products like jackfruit. When you say jackfruit, it's a young jackfruit. I think that had been a new product, but there are about 1,500 tons has been exported out of the country in the last year. So you also see that there are new trending products. The consumer behaviors are changing. Sometimes it can be a health concern. Sometimes it can be another concern, especially the new generation. When they come up, you could see that more and more consumers would now at the moment when we are called about generation X or Z actually. So they are still dependent, but when they become consumers by their own, I would see there can be a lot of aspects like animal welfare, animal cruelty, things like that also coming into the food chains. But also on the other hand, from the regulation point of view, even now EU came up with their carbon taxes, but which is not applied for the food items yet. But I would see that could also be falling in line with the food chain. So then the importers would have a direct financial benefit sourcing products through clean supply chains. I think that would also drive. So these could also change, even though the product-wise, I won't see the supply chain-wise, it could stay like that. But of course, there can be now new products with higher antioxidants, higher health benefits that would come into the market. Also, on the other hand, there could also be some other certifications in addition to organic that could be demanded in the market. Of course, organic would be the entry, organic would be the whole focus, but around it, you may have to justify your social and environmental compliance as well in the future.
Right. So, Roshan, with that, we come to the end of our discussion. Thank you for having us at your new office premises, and thank you for your insights and thoughts, and we'll hope to connect with you soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.